I've talked about these so-called big three of disinformation spreaders. At least two of them claim to be from Russia.
If we maybe go into these one after one. We're here for another Visegrad24 podcast with Pekka Kallioniemi today, the author of the famous VatnikSoups that probably a lot of our followers have seen on Twitter. Welcome.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
So you have been revealing various types of Russian influence peddlers, misinformationists, and other types of, info warriors, you could say, that serve the Russian war machine. How did you start with this project?
So, my background is in social media research. For the longest time, I was speaking against being on social media platforms because in many ways, I feel like it's can be a harmful thing in excess. But then when the war started, I decided, okay, I have to be on Twitter because that's the breaking news kind of platform where you get the latest stuff on basically everything. I created an account. Nobody really cared. I went for unnoticed for a very long time. Maybe my cousins followed me or something. But then in October, at the beginning of October, I realized that I have been having same conversations with the same people over and over again about what's going on in Ukraine. What are for example, causes of the war in Ukraine, and I was wondering who are these people who are the original sources of these narratives. And I started writing about prominent Finnish pro-Kremlin propagandists. The first ever VatnikSoup, it wasn't called that back then, but it was like this expose. Was about Finnish propagandist who lives in Donetsk, I think, Janus Putkonen, who has a long history of peddling misinformation, disinformation for the Kremlin, and there's proof for that. So he's actually paid by the Kremlin. And at that point I had 80 followers, so basically nobody followed me, but somehow it resonated with people.
And this was October 2022.
Yes. So at the beginning of October, it got quite a few likes and impressions and so on. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna do it again the next day, introducing another Finnish propagandist. But at that time, I didn't really think that it would become this kind of long series. I was just doing it because it resonated with people. And then somebody suggested to me that I should also focus on international figures because there are so many. So maybe a week after that, I wrote my first international VatnikSoup.
Who was that?
Partisan girl, Syrian girl.
Oh, sure.
Maram Susli, I think is her name. And from that, it started like slowly growing, actually quite quickly, in a sense that I had 80 followers and soon I had thousands. But then probably Patriarch Kirill was the first kind of. So there's usually somebody who kind of it really skyrockets the following. So Patriarch Kirill was probably because
the KGB agent in charge of the Russian Orthodox Church.
Exactly, and also with his famous,
person, very expensive watches.
Yes, and also the smuggling. Well, not smuggling, but selling all the tobacco during the 90s in Russia. So that's how he became so rich.
A man of God.
Exactly. Yes. But anyway, that's probably one of the first ones that kind of skyrocketed the popularity.
How would you say that the Twitter platform has developed over the years when it comes to information warfare?
The thing about fighting usually disinformation, the problem is that it's so immediate. So you have this breaking news. People share always, if they see something big happening, they share it without actually checking what's going on.
You want to be the first one.
Exactly. You want to break that. You want to be the one who breaks the news because that gets the likes, the shares. You get the engagement. You get this, the dopamine rush. So you want to be the first one. And that's kind of, in terms of disinformation, it's extremely harmful. So we can take maybe a couple of examples here. So one of them was the air defense missiles from Ukraine landing in Poland. and people were immediately saying that it was a Russian rocket landing in Poland, and this was probably during the evening, and then throughout the night it was like it's Russian. So we had this Article 5, and then it turned out to be Ukrainian air defense missile. So, and another example is the alleged bombing of the hospital or the parking lot. In
very recent case from Gaza.
Yes. So immediately people were like, okay, the casualty numbers coming from Hamas.
Or the Gaza Health Ministry, as many sources call them.
Yes. So 500 casualties. And then when we actually look at what happened, the open source intelligence information, like all this data coming in, so there is no any fragments of a missile. It's actually in the parking lot, and some of the cars were destroyed, and that's basically it.
What is interesting there, though, is that big media like the BBC, I'm not sure, maybe New York Times, but many of the big mainstream media, they also very quickly bought into this Hamas version of events, saying that it was an Israeli strike.
Yeah, so they took the narrative that was basically, well, I don't know if it was fed to them, but it's provided to them by the administrators from the Gaza.
It felt like it went Hamas, social media, mainstream media.
Yeah,
this was the order.
So, and then it was actually up to the open source intelligence people to kind of look into the matter and realize that this is not what it seems. And they in this sense, they didn't wait for it to develop. You usually have to wait a while for the story to develop, but you want the engagement, you want the clicks. That's one of the worst things in social media, in my opinion.
And it looks like mainstream media is trying to not be left behind, so they also tend to start getting into this, that whatever is trending on social media right now, we will write about it, and worst case, later we will make a retraction and say we're sorry, but we need to get the story out because we need to compete with social media.
Yeah, and that's what I've noticed in Finnish media is that they change headlines every now and then. So I don't know, it could be also related to engagement, so what kind of headline gets the clicks, but sometimes they are updating these quite frequently, like what the headline says, because that's basically what we make the decision based on that, like do we click on it or not.
Returning to these VatnikSoups, initially, where did the name come from?
It was suggested to me by a user who doesn't exist anymore. And he just sent me a message like, you should call it like a VatnikSoup, I think would be a nice name. And it's a good name. Yeah, it is a good name.
It caught on. It definitely caught on. And if we look at these VatnikSoups, we have a number of... How many in total do you think there might be now?
235 maybe. Oof. Maybe a bit more.
Yeah. And some of them have been really like breaking because, for example, like Kim.com is somebody that everybody knew who he was. Maybe they didn't know exactly what he had said previously, but they knew his identity. But some of these were anonymous accounts that previously we didn't know who was behind them, who was writing them. But you managed to find out who they were. How does that process look like of finding out who is behind an anonymous account?
It involves some procedures I don't want to go through here.
Naturally.
But basically it's open source intelligence still, like databases, this kind of stuff. So
digging into internet history.
Yes. So yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that cannot be removed from. Once it goes online, it's very difficult to take out.
Wayback Machine is always alive.
Yeah. I mean, so it involves a lot of that. But also, well, there are other techniques to make. But so I have a team, or I'm part of a team. I don't have a team called the Intelligence Agency, where we kind of do these investigations. So there are very capable people there. I'm more of the megaphone. I put the information out there, and hopefully it gets noticed. Sometimes it does. Often it does. So, for example, in case of Donbass Devushka, who claimed to be poor woman in Lugansk with the Russian in Luhansk, of course, but and she was collecting money, like donating money to charities in Donetsk and Luhansk and these areas, and basically she was a woman from New Jersey who faked poorly a Russian accent.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, "Is this for real? Like, what's this accent? Like, it's New Jersey and Russian mixed up together?" And it was just ridiculous. But yeah, we did a very thorough investigation on her, who turned out to be Sarah Bills from the United States.
Former army employee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I don't really know about these access levels, but she had access to some like quite high level things.
And now lately she has rebranded as part of this collective DD, or what are they called?
DD Geopolitics.
Yes.
I think the DD comes from Donbas Devushka, maybe, but it's growing really fast. But their engagement at the moment is ridiculously low, so they really don't. They are not making any difference basically online. They're trying, but it's nothing like Jackson Hinkle, for example, or
Yeah, Jackson Hinkle has been doing very well on Twitter, and many people wonder where did this growth come from? Because now he's at 1.2 or 3 million followers, and I think quite recently he was at 500,000. So it's explosive. Where do you think this might come from?
So I think maybe a year ago when I checked his profile, it was at 100,000. So now it was 1.5 million. So I feel like it's, of course, it's not organic. We can clearly say that it's not organic. It's constructed. It's being pumped, and I feel like this, like going for the Palestine thing, pro-Palestine, you get a lot of support from troll farms from the Arab countries, for example, and that's a huge segment. So they can really push your follower count up. So that's kind of my theory. But he was also pushed by the Kremlin troll farms. And
yeah, Jackson, I think he went to Moscow recently, if I'm not mistaken, a few weeks ago, and he was there and he was being driven around and giving access to various types of luxuries and privileges. But his profile is interesting because he is basically promoting any kind of anti-Western narrative or country. It doesn't matter if it's North Korea or the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, Iran. Basically, whoever is against the West, Jackson supports them.
Or who is the friend of the Kremlin, or in somehow
yes,
friend.
Right now, these two they are the same.
Yeah. Friend is a relative term, of course, here, but I mean associated with the Kremlin. So yeah, there's definitely a link there. But again, when he was in Russia, he gained 500,000 followers in 2 days. So even before what happened in Palestine. So he's being pumped, that's for sure.
And also, I think many people don't realize that he has been a self-described Stalinist or Marxist-Leninist, I'm not sure exactly what, but he has been a communist supporter for quite a long time. And I think many people who follow him don't even realize that this is the case.
Yeah, he calls it MAGA communism, so whatever that means. But basically, he's like Trump and then communism. It's weird.
It's an interesting marriage.
I don't think he knows what it means, but it's just something, you put these hype words together and you have something.
Well, it clearly works for him. But it's interesting that many of these people who peddle Russian influence are not Russians at all. You mentioned Donbas Devushka from the US, but we have other cases here from Europe as well, a few of them which you revealed.
I've talked about these so-called big three of disinformation spreaders. At least two of them claim to be from Russia. One of them is Trollstoy88, of course. German guy claimed to be from Russia. And then Zoga200, who was allegedly Bosnian Serb. And then Geroman AT, who is from Austria.
Yes.
But basically, he's never claimed to be from Russia. But yeah, he's Austrian communist.
If we maybe go into these one after one, how would you describe Zoka200? Who is Zoka200?
A young guy who's interested in probably the conflict, the war in Ukraine, and pushing the pro-Russian point of view. And then kind of suggesting to be someone they're not. So I don't remember the name of this Russian lady bodybuilder who I think she sent a message to Arnold Schwarzenegger at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. But basically, she was like using her images for promoting her account. And he turned out to be just a regular nurse guy from Bosnia. And
Did he shut down his account, or am I?
yes,
he did.
Yes. Most of these accounts that then, if they close their accounts, they are then hijacked, often by NAFO people or somebody. So you can actually, if somebody deletes their account, it can be hijacked. So you can take the name for yourself. So. I would imagine that the current Zoga account with the same name is
somebody else.
Is somebody else, yeah.
And what about Jeroman, because he has also been doing very well on Twitter.
Jeroman seems to be Austrian communist who strongly believes in Russia and the victory of Russia. So he's quite bad analyst. That's what I've heard. I'm not a good analyst, so I don't really.
I have seen threads of Jeroman's predictions, and it is we will be in Kiev in 3 days. They will never receive HIMARS. Basically, whatever Jeroman says, a few weeks later, happens. The opposite happens.
Exactly. Yeah. You go with that, but. Just a regular guy from Austria. I wouldn't say that there's anything special about him other than he's usually wrong.
Yeah.
So.
But then we also have these other people who you mentioned that they are not anonymous. For example, Kim.com. Who are these people who, for some reason, live in the West? They are quite famous. They are quite successful. But for some reason, they take a pro-Russian line. What do you think is behind this?
I think in many cases it's this contrarian anti-establishment worldview that's kind of pushing it, and also they often believe in conspiracy theories. I mean, Kim.com is a perfect example. He's been sued in the U.S. and they're trying to extradite him to the U.S. For his crimes, cyber crimes, I assume, or copyright stuff. But he's been this contrarian throughout his whole life. He was hacker and this kind of stuff. So he's always probably been a bit out like an outsider. But yeah, in his case, it seems like he is still like. Well, at some point he said he's gonna leave Twitter. He's not gonna post anymore. But he's still posting.
He seems to be one of those addicted to Twitter.
Exactly, yeah. And he's one of the few people who has threatened to sue me. So he was looking for a solicitor, like a lawyer in Finland trying to get me sued, and like he's gonna put me into bankruptcy and so on. But of course it never happened. Nothing happened. And
But also here, speaking about repercussions, do you get any kind of threats or anything like this coming your way after these releases of information that you have done?
Of course, yeah. It's usually interesting when I start talking about money or how can we affect the flow of money. Then they usually come in. So
this is when they get upset.
Yeah. That's that's probably why many of them are doing it. So if you start talking about the money and you follow the money trail, they get
shows their motivation.
So yeah, when I started going after Donbass Devuska's new channel, the money stuff there, and I got a death threat from Swedish individual, and we quickly identified him. I think he usually goes by the name Ghost on Twitter and Telegram, and so that was pretty nasty because it was just basically threats against me and my family. Well, you can always threaten me, but when it's about family, then it's a bit sad.
Also, what is interesting here is you mentioned that your first stories were about Finnish people who were spreading pro-Russian narratives. But in general, if you look at Finland and Sweden, actually, I think both countries are among the top 3 in the world where the largest percentage of the population support Ukraine. Where does this strong support for Ukraine come from?
In the case of Finland, it probably comes from the history. So we had Winter War, Continuation War. We fought the Soviet Union. So it's the history. So my grandmother was she had to evacuate twice. She was 13 and 15, if I remember correctly, with dozen cows, like going to the other side of the country with people she didn't know. And there's a lot of this like history in that. Our country was demolished and a lot of people died because of the war. So and some of you may, some of the people who listen to this may know about the shelling of Mainila. So it was this false flag attack.
A very interesting case.
Yes, so basically Russians shelled their own positions,
and claimed that this was Finland.
Yeah, and I think it's still they still plan a lot of these false flag attacks, but fortunately intelligence is it's pretty good these days in these cases. So they've been exposed before these kind of operations are conducted.
Yeah, this feels like it's a little bit of when you live with Russia as a neighbor, whether you're in Poland, in Finland, in the Baltic states, it seems like you have more understanding of what Russia's true nature is. When you're farther away, in Portugal, in France, in Holland, maybe this Russian threat doesn't seem so direct. But also those people, they seem to be more prone to, oh, the Russians said this, they promised this, so we will believe in it. While in our part of Europe, we are more used to these Russian lies.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always quite naive to believe a politician, whatever country they come from. But if they come from Russia, then that's just ridiculous. Why would you do that? Because there's like this long history of lies after lies.
It's also interesting because we remember some of these people that were pro-Russian from the start. Back in February 2022, when you had this large military buildup on the borders of Ukraine, Lavrov, Putin, various Russian officials were out and they were saying, oh, no, we will never invade. This will never happen. And all the pro-Russians online, they were saying anybody who suggests that Russia is about to invade is crazy and is lying and so on. And then, of course, Russia invaded. And for the first few days, these people were quite quiet about this thing. But now lately, it feels like they're coming back again and they are just saying that you can trust Russia. You can, the Russians, they don't lie, they are truthful. While the people in the West, the Western leaders, they've made biolabs with mosquitoes and birds that are flying into Russia and so on. Do you feel that these people that claim that you can believe the Russians when they say something, is it because they themselves are fooled by Russia, or they just have this money interest that you mentioned earlier?
I think it's both. I mean, people in politics, people tend to have pretty bad memory in general. For example, if you have elections, politicians make a lot of promises, and then when they get elected, those are often forgotten. But I mean, yeah, people tend to have a short kind of memory in this type of stuff. And of course, it's the money too. They want the gas, they want the oil, they want things to go back to as they were.
Business as usual.
Yes, they want the raw materials. I mean, you need them for Teslas, you need them for SpaceX rockets. So you kind of want to go back to the old times when Russia could basically do the small conflicts in some areas, but it wouldn't really invoke any kind of big reaction in anybody.
And when it comes to this information warfare, we've discussed the people on the opposing side, so to say, but those who support Ukraine, you naturally have the Ukrainians themselves that they are investing a lot in trying to reach the world with information from Ukraine. But you also have various collectives. You have, for example, this North Atlantic Fella organization, or NAFO, that was very active, especially in the first weeks of the war. But you also have various OSINT communities that they investigate various Russian claims, where a missile came from, for example. And there are these wider networks that are supporting Ukraine as well. Do you think that they have been doing a good job in this war, or there is more that can be improved on?
I watched the interview you did with Kate, and I think she said the same thing, that NAFO has been extremely valuable asset in fighting Russian disinformation, because it fights fire with fire. It basically uses the same high volume approach, but it ridicules the messenger. So if you have Russian embassy tweeting something that's obviously a lie, NAFO activists will flood the comments with ridiculous. They will ridicule the messenger, because that's the only way to counter this high volume approach of Russian propaganda. You do the fact checking later, but first you have to. It's like the tourniquet. You get a shot in the leg, you put the tourniquet in, and then you do the surgery later. So surgery is the fact checking, but the tourniquet is the NAFO. You have to do something to kind of stop the blood flow or the bullshit flow.
And ridicule is really a potent weapon. The Russians, they have been working hard on these fake narratives a long time. I don't remember exactly what the factory is called, but they have this facility outside of St. Petersburg somewhere, where you have a couple of hundred of people coming in every day, doing 8 hours of work, and just posting on all platforms, in all comments. I'm not sure what it's called now.
Internet Research Agency?
Maybe it could be.
So that was originally Prigozhin's outlet. So it was IRA, Internet Research Agency. It was in St. Petersburg, and then it became, I think, Lakta because it was in a skyscraper. But it was basically Prigozhin's project that's probably taken over by the Kremlin. Internet Research Agency was established in 2013. It employed at its peak, it was probably 1,000 employees, and Finnish journalist Jessica Aro made a very good expose on what they do, and they interviewed the former employees and so on. And for example, after Prigozhin's death, one of the former employees said that the people who were talking about the genocide in Donbas, spreading that narrative, that they were crisis actors. They were paid actors. Yeah. So,
yeah, there are some of these narratives that they have been pumping out, and it's clear that these are various slogans that the people are told to repeat. For example, 14,000 dead over 8 years in the Donbas. Another one was the biolabs. Early on in the invasion, from the Russians, you would constantly hear, we had to invade because the Ukrainians and Americans were building biolabs that were about to target ethnic Russians through some kind of bioengineered virus that would only target ethnic Russians. It is interesting because this type of information warfare, digital information warfare, is part of hybrid warfare. And hybrid warfare is something that the Russians, under the Gerasimov doctrine, have been pushing for many years, even before but we remember, in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, it wasn't Russian soldiers, it was the green little men. Classic disinformation, hybrid warfare tactic. And technically, you use hybrid warfare when you cannot use normal symmetric warfare because you're too weak. The Russians, at least in 2014-15, were very weak, and then they pushed hard on trying to brainwash people. But on the other hand, it's an old Soviet tactic. During the Cold War, the Soviets were also very heavily invested in trying to brainwash people in the West. Have you seen any specific trends when it comes to Russian misinformation tactics or hybrid warfare over the last few years?
I mean, if you look at the 2014, this time period in general, there was a lot of, I mean, what the Russians had, they had money. They had a lot of money, so they pushed quite a bit of money to these separatist movements in Odessa, in Kharkiv. And also there was a person who was a kind of a advisor to Putin called Vladislav Surkov.
The grey eminence of
the
Kremlin.
Or the puppet master or whatever. He has a lot of names because what he did was genius. We have to admit as much that he was a genius in a sense, but he was also micromanaging the whole these republic in Donbas, Luhansk, these fake republics, and he was also like micromanaging them on a really low level, like what kind of furniture do you get to the embassy and this kind of stuff. trying to make the whole thing look credible. Like these are actual republics that want to be independent, and he was doing all the controlling from the Kremlin. And then there was Sergei Glazeyev, who was funding these separatist movements in Odessa and in Kharkiv, as I mentioned earlier. And there was money involved, of course. And you had the Titushka, the Russian, what would you call them?
Paid rioters.
Paid
criminals.
Yeah. So
we're attacking these pro-Maidan demonstrations.
Yeah, extremely violent thugs.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of this kind of hybrid warfare stuff going on even back then, and that's when the war started. Of course, it's been going on since 2014, and then the full-scale invasion started in 2022. But I mean, they've used this hybrid warfare, this Gerasimov doctrine for a long time, and it works. I mean, if Gerasimov is a terrible leader in war, like probably the worst war in Russia. Maybe I could do better, but the Gerasimov doctrine is quite genius. Also, we have to give credit for that.
When it comes to internet information spreading, what would you recommend to people when they look for news online? What do they need to look for in order not to be tricked?
I mean, I would wait, at least if you have breaking news, just wait for a while. I mean, 10 hours can do miracles to the narratives. It can completely change, as we have seen in some cases. But the problem is that people make up their minds so fast, and we are extremely biased people. We tend to kind of lean to the narrative that supports our worldview.
We have our own echo chamber.
Exactly, and we are in these information bubbles where it's very difficult to penetrate the different or the, like, I don't know, the perspective that's against our own. So, but I would give news some time before maybe spreading them or liking them on social media, because it can actually be harmful if you spread. It turns out to be disinformation, or in this case, it would be misinformation because you don't do it intentionally. So disinformation is when you have this intent. Okay, I know that this is false, but I'll still spread it because for reasons. But give news some time, and I also would suggest people to kind of detach themselves from social media altogether for a while, because this is where the real things happen. We and this kind of human touch, human communication and interaction, we miss that when we just read text, walls of text. So,
and maybe a final question here. Where do you think the war in Ukraine is going? If you look at the general attitudes among people, does Ukraine still have support among the wider West?
So what we need now is support from the states, from the individual countries, because people are drawn to trends. We have to admit it. Like as soon as so we remember COVID was a big thing. After the full-scale invasion, it wasn't a thing anymore, like at all. Nobody talked about COVID-19 anymore, or vaccines or whatever. Some tried, but nobody cared. And now it might be like this Hamas-Israel situation, or the situation in the Middle East is taking a lot of attention from Ukraine. But we still have to rely on these democratic Western countries to keep their support, even though it's not the hot topic anymore. We still have to support Ukraine until they win, because they will win. It's just a matter of time. And how can we make this win easier for them is to help them with whatever they need, like send them basically what they need to win the war. That
sounds like a good conclusion for the podcast. Send Ukraine whatever they need to win the war. They are fighting for all of us, especially for us who live in countries right next to Russia. Pekka, thank you very much for coming on, and we hope to have you back soon again.
Yes, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you.